Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this seminar. Here you can see some recommendations for our webinar. The first is that your audio is automatically connected when you join the webinar. In case that you have questions, you can use the Q&A space. We are going to have some space on the agenda to answer them. And after the session, please help us fill in the survey. We are going to start with the CIO of GTT in Guyana, that is Justin Need. Thank you, Justin, and please go ahead. You are muted.
Hello,
Now,
hello
now we can
everyone,
hear you.
and welcome to today's session of CANTO Conversations. Really, in the blink of an eye, our homes became our offices as we, fight the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. Challenges abound, and security is really one of the 100 things that are at the top of the priority list during this transition. In 2020 BC, that is BC being before COVID, less than 10% of workers work from home at least several times a month in the Latin America, Caribbean, and North America region. Contrast that to Scandinavia and Europe, right? Some parts of Europe, Denmark, Holland, Sweden, those numbers are north of 20%. So work from home is really going to become much more mainstream, especially with some professions and industries. Change is really upon us. So this now presents new opportunities, new challenges, and we're really experiencing years of change in a matter of months. Ensuring that the security of being remotely accessible and the security of remote workers is a critical priority for any company transitioning to a remote workforce. And as we enter this new universe of challenges, I'm happy that we're here today and we'll have some of those questions answered and we'll have some fears allayed. I am Justin Ned. I'm very happy to be your moderator today. And on chat this morning, we will talk to Kevin Ajodha, who is a security specialist at Cisco. And we will be talking about protecting the remote workers and how to. So Kevin is a Cisco security specialist with more than 10 years of experience in the IT industry. He has a wide range of experience both in the public and private sectors in multiple countries, and he's worked with multiple technology architectures. At Cisco, Kevin is now responsible for designing solutions across the Cisco portfolio. And previously, Kevin held roles as an IT auditor, information security consultant, pre-sales consultant, field engineer, and we worked with the Ministry of National Security as an incident handler in Trinidad in the security response team. So his focus is really in information security with a specialization in policy and procedure development, security operations, incident response, forensic investigations, vulnerability assessments, security testing, and PCI compliance. Kevin is also a part-time lecturer at the School of Accounting and Management in Trinidad, where he delivers his knowledge in network security, cryptography, computer systems, and servers. Kevin holds a bachelor's degree from New York Institute of Technology in computer science and a master's in Management Information System from FIU, Florida International University. So Kevin, welcome to CANTO Conversations, and we're extremely excited to hear what you have to share with us today. Over
Thank
to you.
you. Thank you, Justin. Much appreciated. Really appreciate the rounding and, of course, the introduction. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being our moderator this morning. Of course, you yourself, Justin, will be bringing a wealth of experience into the conversation. And later on, when we get into the moderated side of things and even on the Q&A side of things, I'm looking forward not just to share my experiences as well, but of course, a conversation with you as well, and even our members in the audience this morning. So thanks, Justin, again. My name is Kevin Ajodha. I am one of the system engineers here at Cisco. And as Justin has outlined, I've had a myriad of experience across the information security portfolio, across information security technologies. And of course, I'm also bringing experience from other types of technologies, right? Enterprise networking and data center and so on. Because here at Cisco, we want to look at a holistic approach to problem solving, right? To solve both public and private sector organizational challenges using technologies. And securing the remote work environment is one of those challenges, especially today. So that's something I want to talk and just have a quick conversation with you about. Hans, would it be okay if you pass me the ball, please, so I can share some content?
For sure. Give me just 1 second.
Right. So while Hans is doing that, I'm going to just kind of get my screen up and ready here, and we're going to segue into this particular presentation this morning, which is securing the remote work environment. So Hans, quick check. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, probably that thing too on the side. So great. So as we said, securing the remote work environment, right? We intend to really spend maybe about 15 to 17 minutes on this, because this is not going to be slide upon slide. Oh my God, it's just inundating you with information. This is really intended to be a conversation. So for us, yes, we are talking about securing remote work environment, but we really have three things that I think are important to capture in this conversation today. Now, the first thing that I wanted to capture in the conversation is the risk reality or the risk landscape. So as organizations, yes, we think about security, but we also have to contextualize it in the sense of risk. What risk does it pose to my organization? And how has that risk evolved given what I call the pandemic era, right? Then we need to look at the architecture. And when I mean architecture, I mean, what is there now that you have to mitigate against your risks from a technology perspective or from an IT perspective? And we'll talk a little bit about BCP and DRP. What's there now, and how do we need to adapt that to be able to address the somewhat evolving challenges that remote workers or remote working brings to the organization? So we need to talk a little bit about how do we architect this, and it's not going to be, like I said, a very super technical conversation, but it's just to kind of give you an idea of what we've been looking at. And then last but not least, we're going to have an integrated and automated approach, right? So once we've figured out, okay, my risk has changed, okay, that's pretty apparent. My architecture probably needs to change a little bit. My posture maybe needs to be adjusted in some way or something like that. And now we need to figure out, okay, how do I respond, right? What do I need to have in place so that I can, capture these new risks or mitigate against these new risks, or, adapt to my, what I think is my desired architecture. And I'm going to just maybe touch on a couple slides. It's very broad, nothing security related, but what Cisco sees as the future of work, which ties into security, but it also ties into a lot of other things as well, right? And at the center of it is the human. So we need to talk about that, definitely. So this is one of those slides that just kind of comes out at you, and it just kind of drives the point home, right? And the point home is this is definitely something that is here, that is happening. We've heard this term, the new normal. We've probably heard it one too many times. But the point being is that this is a thing. Coronavirus, COVID-19 is a thing, and it has caused us to shift the way that we both consume services and provide services, right? So as a business or as an individual, I could tell you personally that I have shifted the way that I consume, for example, take out food, right? I'm here in Trinidad, we use an app and we can have that food delivered to us, which, wasn't as pervasive as it was before, but because of this has now taken off and definitely has, gotten some leverage or a bit of a push because of the coronavirus, right? Or because of COVID-19. Now, the thing about it is that we know that this is work from home, but we were never really, I mean, it was nice to talk about. It was nice to talk about workforce mobility, but we weren't really kind of expected to be thrust into the middle of this conversation, to be thrust into, what we expect as work from home, just all of a sudden 80% of our workforce, right? That just really wasn't the expectation. So that's why we have this thing here as like a largest work from home experiment. Coronavirus, COVID-19 is something that we need to continue to monitor. Again, here, just right here in Trinidad, we've had some news picking up on it, and of course, we may look at some different measures or some return of some measures and so on. So this is going to continue to be a conversation for a long time, and of course, it's now going to be a technological conversation for us, right? So the thing about it is that from a risk perspective, right? Remember that first agenda point that I had here. From a risk perspective, the risks generally are still the same. What has changed is where these risks appear. So when I mean, sorry, the risk areas generally kind of remain the same, right? They've just shifted. So for example, the risk reality that we kind of face with today, of course, we're more interconnected, right? Connectivity is a thing. We're on LTE, we're on broadband, we're on SD-WAN, we're on everything that we could think about, right? Just to get connectivity. Things must be, 24/7, right? We expect, gone are the days when, we go into an office and we turn on a machine and, then we have access to that, application that we were using, and then we leave the office and we come home and then that's it. We have no access to anything, right? Now we have technologies that enable us to have continuous operations. This piece here is very important, and it speaks to what we're dealing with in the remote worker era, which is workers connecting everywhere. Creates a little bit of a challenge, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, which is loss of control. Of course, multi-cloud. So this is a conversation, seems a little bit different from security, but it's still related, right? Multi-cloud, where do we have our applications? Where are applications being consumed from? And how does that affect my business, right? It's a software-defined world, and how does that affect my business, and where are my risk areas now more so than before in terms of consuming these types of services? Last but not least, this has always been a thing, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the shifts that we've seen, but there's a lot of automated and sophisticated threats out there. What this means is that, we have basically, a malware and a lot of different types of ransomware and different types of attacks. They continue to be presented in a form that is very, 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 very different from maybe even last year, right? Some of the stuff that we've seen here at Cisco from a shift perspective, especially from about March of this year, we've noted three things, right? Something that we call the Great Migration, right? So based on our DNS capturing, because we operate some DNS servers across the world, we've basically seen remote work doubled between early and late March, right? Interestingly enough, this is also a key one as well, two topical shifts in spam. So we've actually seen topics of spam, coming in and saying like, oh, there's a stimulus payment, or maybe there's a package delivery type thing coming from so and so, and you need to click here because of COVID-19 measures and so on and so forth. So we're actually seeing a topical shift in spam, and the end goal is to get users to click on a link, right? When you click on that link, either something malicious happens on that web page, or you could potentially be phished. So that's kind of the risk on how that's been shifting. Of course, we've seen an increase in malicious domains as well too. What this means is that we have basically, drag you across here, we've basically seen domains related to the pandemic, right? So it could be, now this is just an example, but it could be Ministry of Health Trinidad -pandemic com or whatever it is, and that is actually a malicious domain, giving out malicious information, encouraging people to download forms and so on. That, again, that was an example, right? So that's just three things that we've seen that are, really kind of topically shifting now that now that the pandemic and remote worker eras are now kind of in full swing, right? So we kind of have to rethink risk a little bit, and for us that means looking at it from an architectural perspective and seeing where we are and where we need to be. So let me jump into that portion of it, right, which is the architectural side of things. So over here, this is just really, let me just go back one. This is really just in nuts and bolts, very basic, right? From the secure remote work type architecture, very standard, very basic stuff. Of course, your experience may vary, your mileage may vary as well too. But typically what we've seen is we have this over here, right? Hopefully employees not sick, right? But we have employees or customers, as the case may be, and they're over here, right? They're on the endpoint side. And if it's an employee, they need to get access to some resources, right? So that's going to be over at headquarters. And we would use something like a tunnel, right? Like a virtual tunnel over the internet, a virtual secure tunnel over the internet called Virtual Private Network, VPN, that gets us from here, from our endpoint, into the headquarters that allows us access into the resources of headquarters, like applications and so on and so forth, right? So, we've seen that. If the endpoint has to go out to the internet, right, we want to make sure that that internet connection is secure. So we're doing some sort of filtering or something like that, right? And this could be achieved using something like DNS layer security or something along those lines. But this is also an architecture. So this is also part of the architecture that we need to look at, because why? We may have resources, we may have applications that we need to consume in cloud. Last but not least, so I'll talk about endpoint detection and response in the next couple of slides, but in this one, it's multi-factor authentication. So this is basically, how do you know you are who you are? And this is basically, I have a username, I have a password, but that's not good enough. You need to provide me a token that also verifies, a token that only you could have, only you could generate, that makes it sure that you are who you are, and that's also called multi-factor authentication. Right, so all these things just kind of come together to give us an authentication and architecture profile that helps us to secure the remote work environment from a user perspective or from a connecting perspective of our employees, of our customers, the clients, and so on and so forth. Right, so again, this is just some of the building blocks. What I encourage everyone to do is, look at it from the flow perspective, which your business is, if you are in a payment business, if you are in the business of collecting payments for anything, you're selling something, there's always going to be somebody processing a credit card or processing some sort of payment. And along the way, there's going to be some parts of network, parts of applications and so on that's going to get touched. So we need to just kind of figure out what those risk areas are. And again, we could deep dive into this into the Q&A side of things. But you need to figure out where your application, where your business transactions are going, right? What's the flow of your application? What's the flow of your business? And think about what are the risk areas associated with that particular flow. Is it the endpoint? Is it the network? Is it the cloud application? Where are the differences in the, or where could those potential risk areas be? And then we start securing that part. So I encourage you to think about it like that as well too. Not just from a hard and fast, oh, I need this device, I need this solution, but think about what capabilities you need along the way. I've spoken about the endpoint detection and response before. This is my third point on the agenda, which is, how do we, once we've had the architecture in mind, once we've had the business, outlined, the business transaction outlined, we've identified our risk areas, we've looked at, everything, and we've provided capabilities in each of those risk areas. What do we do then, right? Do we go buy new stuff? Do we, how do I know that I am effective at mitigating against my risk? So the first thing is, one of my recommendations would be basically automated threat detection and response. So I want to be able to know, and I'm using threat here, but I could kind of broadly apply this to incident. So I want to know at some point where if something happens to one of my employees' machine and they're at home, that's not going to affect my applications or my internal corporate network that sits in the office, and those applications there, or another employee that's sitting in his home. I don't want that to spread laterally. I don't want that to move around. I would ideally like to have one single view of threats, and then I want to be able to take action on those threats, no matter where they are. They could be email, they could be endpoints, they could be on servers. That doesn't matter. They could be in cloud. It could be in the network. It could be outside of the network. It could be through an internet connection. Doesn't matter. I would like to, from an endpoint detection or automated threat detection and response perspective, we need to be able to cover all those areas, identify where those threats are, and of course, isolate and deal with them. Last bit here, the future of work, right? We at Cisco identified five trends, sorry, that we say are the future of work, right? And this is not just from a security perspective or a COVID-19 pandemic perspective, but this is also from a collaboration perspective, right? And these trends were basically what you see here. Now, where we at right now, where we've kind of been forced is technology disruption, right? This is not a demand for flexibility. This is a requirement of flexibility, right? So, where we're seeing COVID-19 kind of playing into the space right now is flexibility and disruption. And so when we talk about, the future of work, there's this center point here, and this is my last point. The center point here is people. At the end of the day, the reason we're doing this is to protect people. People are the most important asset that you can have in any organization anyway. You always basically put your people first. And in this scenario here, yes, we're talking about security and security to protect you, the organization, but also to protect your people. When we are looking at the future of work, we have to think about it from, people-centered, and we look at everything that goes around that: work style, workspace, and workflow. Right. So, now workspaces are going to change as the post-pandemic comes upon us, and we're going to have to, exercise social distancing, and, we're not going to have more than 25 people in a space, for example, and so on. We're going to have to rethink the workspace at the end of the day with people in mind. The workflow, it's going to be different now because we're working from home. Typically, I would go, perhaps maybe I need something signed, and I'm going to have to, pick up and walk down to Steve's desk and ask Steve, can you sign this for me? And I go get it back, and I go to printer and scan it. And some people like that workflow, but that's going to change, right? And then of course work style, of course, has to be different from how we are working today. So that's it for me today, just on the slide side of things. I'm going to hand it back to you, Justin, for us to begin the conversation side of things. Justin, you are on mute, I believe.
Yeah. So thank you, Kevin. I think that's quite a bit of knowledge that you imparted in such a short time. And I want to say, for those of you who are just joining us, warm welcome. Please note that a recorded version of the webinar and all prior awesome CANTO conversation webinars during COVID-19 will be on our website, www.canto.org/COVID-19. And for sure, we'd be delighted to hear from the participants today. So I know Kevin really talked about the three main pillars, right? The risk, the architecture, and really the future of work. And I wanted to ask a few questions on each of these, because this is sort of uncharted territory for many businesses, large and small alike, and for the small to medium businesses, it's certainly something that could be overwhelming. So how, in your mind, should organizations really look at their risk assessment processes, given the shift in the way we do business?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Justin, and I appreciate that. So, yeah, quick one for you, or basically, if I could summarize in less than 2 minutes, right? So basically, when you look at your risk assessment, or you look at your risk assessment process, you're going to cover a few different areas, right? IT may be one of them, but you're going to have maybe some other areas that are important to you as a business. From an IT perspective, your risk assessment is going to change based on where or how your delivery of services to your users as well as your customers have changed. So for example, if you are a manufacturing company and you are typically using, for example, some sort of ERP that was based on prem, and that has shifted to the cloud now, because guess what? Everybody has to work from home. It's very difficult for us to spin up and to build capacity on prem. We need workers to connect, do inventory, materials reports, so on and so forth in the ERP. So we went to the cloud. We've now, basically provided that service to my employees as well as my customers. So now that has changed. Your risk assessment now must now take that into consideration. The fact that you have an application that is public, basically is public, it's in public cloud, and you are now looking at the risk associated with, okay, is that transaction secure? Is somebody logging in securely? Do they have two-factor authentication? Is the communication encrypted, and so on and so forth? So short answer is you adapt your risk assessment based on how your processes or your business processes or the way that you've consumed and provided services to your customers and your end users have changed. And just take all those points into consideration.
Okay. And when I listen to you, one of the words that keeps coming up is cloud. And again, for technical people, I guess this is all simple stuff. But for the more non-technical people, and I gotta emphasize, is small to medium businesses, because frankly, they, in terms of businesses' contributions to GDP, especially in the region, is probably 50% or more. So they play an outside role in the economy. And what guidance would you give as businesses are turning to the cloud for service delivery, and guidance to not only the businesses and their employees, but to customers? What really should they be thinking about?
Excellent question, Justin. Absolutely. And definitely, I agree with your point, right? Because there's SMBs, there's large enterprises, there's businesses, big, small and large, that are providing a lot to the economy, and even more so now. Like for example, food business, right? Food business is a big business right now because we need it, right? But there's a limitation in the way that product, in this case, food, can be consumed. So you may have, for example, a food business, a restaurant turning to cloud to consume, to put their ordering online, to have their payments accepted online, and have a delivery type system. So we've seen this. You're right. We are seeing an evolution of business into this type of cloud scenario, and some of the things that we should consider. Now, it's again, if you can do it and it's agile for you, it helps you turn around or bring forth your business in a more effective and efficient way. Definitely. Considerations. As I was saying before, we want to make sure that the way that you're providing those services, those applications, not just to your customers, but to your employees as well, your end users, we want to make sure that that is done in a secure way, right? Which encompasses some of those points before. But the other thing is, think of it from a disaster recovery perspective, right? Now, cloud is good, and you have to kind of sit down with yourself and say, okay, or with your business and said, okay, if I were to somehow lose connectivity to this cloud, what's my backup plan, and how long do I give myself to recover from this particular outage, right? Like for example, there's a tropical storm heading towards the Caribbean right now. Disaster recovery is on anyone's mind, right? Disaster preparedness is on anyone's mind right now, right? So we need to kind of understand what are the risks associated with going cloud, and for example, disaster recovery and business continuity is one of them. But at the other time, we also need to look at how securely we're accessing those services. And I say cloud just to kind of make it simple. Cloud is like Gmail, right? We use cloud every single day. It's basically a service provided outside of your own remit or your own premise, right?
Good, great insight, Kevin. And so to that point, right? It seems that businesses almost have to shift, right, and have to shift in their mindset, uh, probably in their skill set, right, in the people that they hire, and the architecture of their business. And for the most part, on average, businesses spend about between 4 and 10% of their revenue on IT. And of that, uh, let's say at most 10% is spent on security. So what is your guidance that you could give in terms of the importance of security, especially in the context, and if you could segregate that, SMBs versus enterprises, and where should they be looking for the expertise or the resources to deal with this shift that is coming hard and fast?
Excellent question, Justin. I like that question because it brings forth two, like you said, a segmentation there between the SMEs and the enterprises. The SMEs have different things that worry them at night as opposed to the enterprises, right? So the SMEs are just thinking about, okay, I need to deliver to my customers, I need revenue. So they need to look at how quickly and how efficiently they deliver their services. Not saying the large enterprises don't as well. That's also their focus. But the SMEs more so, they just kind of have to figure out how to be agile and how to deliver these services, right? Now, the large enterprises, they also have some consideration as well on the way that they deliver goods and services to their end users and their customers and so on and so forth. But they also have a responsibility to, for example, maintain compliance. So they may have some legal or regulatory compliance that they need to think about, right? And if you're in the payment card industry, well, then everybody has to think about, right? So the thing about it is, when you are looking at this shift and you're looking at your existing investment in technology and resources, and then you're kind of weighing out, okay, how do I leverage what I have versus do I need to make new investment later on to kind of combat these risks and this evolving technological landscape? Both SMEs and enterprises kind of have that similarity, which is they have limited resources and they need to figure out what to do with them, right? Do I need to make existing investments or not? Or do I capitalize on what I have or make new ones? So my answer to that is basically this. If you follow the money, right? And when I say follow the money, follow what's important to you, right? Where's your biggest revenue earner for the SME? Where if that particular part of the business goes down for whatever reason, that's it, we're done, right? Look at that from a risk-based perspective and start to analyze the capabilities that you have to protect that from an information security standpoint. All right, there's going to be other risks that you're going to have to like supplier and vendor control and all this kind of stuff. That's different. But from an information security perspective, make sure that you have the capabilities that deal with what you have now and what you have that you're evolving to. Maybe you only have enough money to consume some cloud services, but you don't have enough money to secure them. That's fine. Look at what you have now. For example, you might already have a multi-factor authentication solution. You may already have VPN. You may already have, some kind of secure internet gateway. So some of these things that you may already have, you can then basically transpose into this new method of consumption or this, existing or new services. For the large enterprises, consider your compliance, right? So if you are, yes, you're going to protect your critical assets, your critical information assets, you're going to do that. But you also need to protect your compliance stance. If you are PCI compliant, you need to also, continue like, okay, you have a payment application that's sitting in your office, then you move it to the cloud. Guess what? PCI applies there too. So you need to look at your risks no matter where you move your assets. And you can make use of the controls that you use to secure with PCI here are the same controls you're going to use to secure in the cloud with some variations. In light of that, understanding that not a lot of us have revenue and money to invest in new technology, In light of that, if you do have the ability to drive change, to drive new investment, then again, same applies. Look at your business flows, look at what's critical to you from end to end, see what capabilities are required and make those investments accordingly, whether it be resources, training, technology products, whatever it is. You need to look at end to end your business transaction.
Good. So the fun thing about IT, if it could be classified as fun, and I know, Kevin, you certainly think it's fun because you've been at this for a long time, is that there's so many acronyms, there's so many abbreviations, and with the pandemic, I think the folks are forced to deal with things fairly quickly. You know, more people are staying home, more people are developing new habits. And one of the things that you spoke about extensively is PCI compliance. Now, I know many businesses who are traditionally bricks and mortar have really gone online. And the region is predominantly cash only. So, you know, they might not have spent much time and effort around cards or collecting money by cards. Could you tell us a bit about PCI compliance and actually what PCI is and how can businesses really get up to speed in the PCI world? Because it's very important, and not following it could take a good business and ruin it fairly quickly. So just for, and I'm really paying attention to the context here of our region, if you could enlighten us a bit more about PCI.
Oh, for sure. Thanks for that opportunity, Justin. I appreciate that. And I'm gonna draw on my experience as a PCI auditor to tell you do's and don'ts and a little bit of what that entails, right? So basically, PCI, payment card industry, right? It is the standards. It is should I say, a body established by GCB, Visa, Mastercard. I think it was one other company, and they've all come together to basically say, listen, we're gonna agree on a set of information control standards or information security control standards that are going to apply to anyone who wants to process, store, or transact credit card information, right? So basically, if you are going to swipe a credit card, right, and that credit card information is going to be transmitted somewhere across the world somehow, and at some point it needs to hit that Visa and Mastercard or Amex JCB network, that they've decided that they're going to come up with this standard called the Data Security Standard, PCI DSS, that's going to be applicable to anyone who meets those criteria. Now, does this apply to you, or me, the one-man show, or the case may be where, we might have like a small business, an SME or something like that. Now, where PCI comes in is, like I said, at the point where you're transacting credit cards, you're moving credit card information, or you're storing it. So under no circumstance should you be storing credit card data. Let me just start with that. Under no circumstance you should be storing your credit card data for any of your customers or anything whatsoever, right? If you are, you're going to need to become PCI compliant, and there are 12 sections inside there that you need to be compliant with, and the audit is not pleasant, right? If you are transacting credit card data, what does this mean for us in the region? It means that if we move towards like online digital payments, you're going to have to locate or find a suitable payment processor that is able to capture that credit card information and is also PCI compliant. Now, on the technical side of it, or how this actually gets implemented, it could be like a like an offshoot of your website. So the customer goes to your website and they basically get redirected to the payment processor for payment, and then they come back to your website, right? That way you're not handling credit card information. You're actually allowing the payment processor to do that, and you don't need to be PCI compliant, but it's something you need to think about, So from that perspective, PCI, what it means for our industry, it means we need to be very cognizant of the information that we capture from our customers, because that, there's a lot of controls and risk that goes around that, and God forbid there's a breach, then we're here in the region, we don't have very strict regulations, laws against it, like in the US where you have to declare, and you could get sued and fined and so on, but there's still a reputation damage that you're going to experience there, right? So for us, yes, we're moving towards COVID type technologies or COVID enabled type technologies, and remote payments is one of those things. For us in the region, we just want to make sure that we want to not store credit card data, and if we have to, make sure, or if we have to process it, make sure we're using a certified, valid, compliant payment processor to do that. All right, this is different. That's online. This is different from your point of sale systems, right? In the Caribbean, generally speaking, point of sale systems are sold to you by bank, and they or by nature, that point of that terminal and the communication between that and the bank is usually part of a PCI compliant solution. So you as a vendor don't need to worry about that.
Excellent answer. Excellent answer, Kevin. And I think in those short few minutes, you were able to really demystify the whole issue about processing payments, because I know businesses are scared about it. And like you said, significant fines, right? I think, who Target, who was it recently? One of the credit
Marriott.
Marriott, yeah, the credit one, Experian or anyway.
Experian, yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the big fines. So we talked quite a bit about some of the technical stuff, but one of the things that really resonated with me was human-centered, right? In terms of the future of work, the people-centered workforce. And I know that's all in the new way of thinking, well, not really that new, but design thinking type approach. And you talked about the work style, the space, and the flow. Now, taking that, putting it with the push to digital, do you have any, like, briefly guidance on how people pull those together and run a business, right?
Yeah. So just to make sure I'm capturing you correctly here, that future of work, that work style, workforce, workplace type centric conversation with the people, with the person involved, perhaps what sort of technologies or what sort of architectures we could look at to bring that picture together, right? So essentially, this is again a conversation beyond security, which I like, right? Because it helps us to speak to that holistic approach towards problem solving, especially in this time. So in that holistic approach to this problem, right? Technology such as, your collaboration tools that help you to, chat one-to-one or things like this, right? That we're having events or we're having meetings and so on and so forth. Those are going to become part of your workflow. And you want to make sure that, bringing it back to the security conversation, you want to make sure that those tools are indeed secured, and you're accessing them securely, that you are controlling the information and where they're installed, how they're used, and so on and so forth. So your collaboration is going to play into your workflow and your work style. So instead of picking up a piece of paper, running down my Steve, can you sign this for me? Guess what? You're going to be emailing Steve, or you're going to be dropping him a message on your IM. And he's going to have to sign that, digitally with a signature, and he's going to have to send you back that on IM. So your workplace work style is going to change from a collaborative perspective. You and I and Hans and Timothy, we're as part of a team. Guess what? We're going to be talking digitally with collaborative tools, and we're going to have maybe a space somewhere where we're going to be chatting and typing with each other, hopefully on a common platform, and exchanging files and information. So that's where technology has taken in the form of the workplace and the work style type conversation. Now, once we get back into the office, here are some things that we need to think about. So social distancing, collaboration, how do we meet, how do we talk, how do we share and exchange information? Well, guess what? The nice thing about this is that we've already built technological systems and solutions to this problem. So we could continue using that in the workplace. So again, I may not be able to walk down by Steve, but I could, shoot Steve a message on my IM application and say, hey, Steve, please sign this for me. And then I could literally stand from my cubicle and yell, Steve, can you get that for me? Right, which is, hopefully, and he's going to be 6 feet apart and all this kind of stuff. In a meeting room, you imagine you're going to have conferences, meeting rooms, people going with their masks, not more than 10 people. You're going to make sure that this thing is spread out, and you want to make sure that you make use of those spaces in an efficient way. And that's where things like your telepresence devices and your conferencing solution that should be able to tie into your collaboration platform to kind of make all of that come together, right? So we're planning now with the individualized workflow, work style, workplace type thinking, right? This is my workplace. This is my apartment. This is my workplace. And that is going to maybe change in a few months' time back to the office. And then we need to be able to adapt those technologies. And what I'm saying is that technologies that we have today, like collaboration and bringing those things together, are very apt in dealing with that human-centered challenge or that human-centered view first here today, and then adapting into the office.
Got it. Great. So, and I think we want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. And I want to say from a Cisco standpoint, origins in Stanford, California, more than 35 years ago, to being at one time the most valuable company in the world, right? Back in 2000, dot-com bubble, endured fierce competition and working on some newer stuff from the early days of circuit switching to now IoT. What should customers expect from Cisco in terms of leadership in the security space? Anything that you can share on that front?
Yeah, there's some things that we could share, and to be honest with you, it's one of those things where this is not new territory for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you why it's not new territory for us. We at Cisco have been working from home ever since. So I've been with Cisco just about 2 years now, and this is my office, right? We've kind of perfected this work from home thing. I'll be quite honest with you. With all our collaboration technologies and our transport technologies and security and everything, we've kind of perfected this. So coming out of this is what you're going to see is Cisco sharing its expertise in how we do what we do. So we have this thing called Cisco on Cisco because we use our own technologies, obviously. And you're going to see more of, and we've been having some of these conversations outside of this, more on the security side of this, but you're going to see a lot of more conversations around how we as Cisco are providing solutions in each of those points and capabilities I would have mentioned before, right? It could be collaboration, it could be security, like that VPN I was just mentioning before, the secure internet gateways, how do I filter content from a laptop at home when I don't have a firewall? Firewalls, all these nice technologies that kind of go together to help mitigate risk. We are going to continue, you're going to hear more and more conversation about those types of things that we've been doing all the time, right? Especially on the endpoint detection and response side of things. We have been talking about that one unified view for us to detect and respond, whether it be from an email, an email threat coming in or on our endpoint, somebody clicking on a link, something happening on a server, or even just some network traffic behaving kind of weird. We've had all of this for a long time. We've been talking about this for a long time. So coming from us, like I said, it's not going to be anything new. It's going to be a lot of stuff that we would have spoken about for some time now, and we're going to actually pump up the volume a little bit more. So, that's kind of, I didn't want to make this a whole Cisco specific stuff, but I mean, I could get into it if you want, but that's kind of where we are strategically on it.
Good, good. I think I had a wonderful opportunity to ask you so many questions. So I want to say thanks for that. I want to ask the audience to send in their questions in the chat, so we can get your insight. So one of the questions I'm seeing here, if you can share examples of reliable or reputable payment processing platforms.
Okay, so I can. Um, I just want to make sure that based on CANTO policy as well too, that we can share that. But I could just say, I can give you the disclaimer right now. This is just my opinion, and this is what I've seen. Right. I encourage you to go out and do your research to find out verified payment processors or verified, approved PCI compliant payment processors in the Caribbean region. One such payment processor that I've seen that has done a lot of work here in Trinidad, and both public and private, is First Atlantic Commerce. So you can actually talk to your local banking representative. Usually they have contacts with the local banks, and they can actually get you in touch with somebody from FAC or maybe some other payment provider that can help you with this type of payment solution integration into your website. A lot of time now you're going to see some other payment options coming out regionally and so on, like WePay and so on, and even if your country accepts it, PayPal. And those are different in the form of payment management and payment type applications. They're more platform specific, whereas FAC, that's credit card. That's just straight credit card processing, right? Whereas PayPal is more of a platform. You need to basically do an exchange on a platform. It's different, accomplishes the same thing, and those, your result, your mileage may vary on those platforms. But definitely on the FAC side of things, or at least from the payment processing side of things, I've seen First Atlantic Commerce, and they are PCI compliant, as last I checked. So they could be one that you can get in touch with to help you do that.
Thanks for that. Yep, and and certainly, I'd say certainly FAC is one of the more popular ones in the region. I think they're in Bermuda, right? So the other question is, based on your experience, Kevin, which industry would be most affected by security threats? For example, would banks be more targeted than telecoms?
So I covered 22 countries, give or take, across the English-speaking Caribbean. And the actual answer to that is generally, this is going to sound weird, but generally in this region, it's the medical, the healthcare side of it that I've seen that are generally a little bit more affected. But it does not mean that the banks or even the energy sector is also not affected. Banks are also affected as well, but the thing is, usually banks in this region, they usually operate from a point of high security. So they may have been, focused on that before. So a lot of times the stuff that we hear, would not come from the banks, right? Now, I'm speaking from my Cisco experience. If I were to jump back into my national security experience, public sector is definitely one of those things where we see, some potential for a lot of threats to be pervasive. And by public sector, I'm looking at utilities, healthcare is one of them here in Trinidad. Some bit of finance, depending on what's relevant at the time. So I remember, like locally here, there was this thing where, there was basically a phishing email purporting to be coming from Ministry of Finance here. This was a couple of years ago. And they were kind of duping citizens into, again, a phishing attack. All right. And of course, Ministry of Finance had to issue a statement and so on. So it depends on what's in season. That could also be something as well. But generally, I'm saying healthcare and utilities, public sector type, organizations. We've seen some interesting things there as well too. Now, what I should also say is that in answering that question, we need to have data to answer that question, right? So I'm saying from my experience of what I've seen in my career here. Now, data is one of those things that you gather by having having sensors, by having the ability to collect that data. And that's a challenge actually right now in this region, right? Because there's a lot of how should I say, not a lot of investment in the intelligence gathering that is required from a organizational perspective as well as a governmental perspective. And I'm not saying go spy on people. I'm saying just see what's happening on your network and log that information. That's all I'm saying. So there's not a lot of information for us to work with because that traditionally has not been a model or an investment point for a lot of organizations here. So I'm saying this with a pinch of salt, consider the season where we don't have a lot of data coming out of the Caribbean simply because of a lack of total visibility into the region. We do have a good chunk of data, but again, it's a visibility thing at this point.
Thank you, and that's a good point. We really do struggle with data in the region. I wanted to talk about one of the things that we probably seeing be a bit more prevalent now, ransomware. And this is a question: how can businesses and individuals protect themselves against ransomware?
That's a fantastic question. So, and there's a very straightforward answer to it, right? But before I give you that straightforward answer, let's just have 30 seconds to understand how ransomware works. And then once we understand it, then we'll know how to treat with it, right? Like with, like with medicine, right? So ransomware basically lands on your machine, lands on an endpoint, and the first thing that it does once it gets there, it says, okay, I have a nice little home here. Let me begin my process. So it needs to call home to the mothership, right? What we call a command and control. That call to home basically starts or initiates the encryption process, right? And that's where encryption begins, and that's where you see the little pop-up on your screen saying your files have been encrypted, and Bitcoin, and blah 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 blah, right? Now, now we understand. Okay, ransomware needs to call home, needs to call to the command and control to start its process. What if, from a protection perspective, we can stop that initial call home? In that way, if we do that, actually, it means that we could prevent the detonation of this particular ransomware. So to answer the question, now that we know how this works, right? And to answer the question, how can we protect against something as ransomware? Number one, you're gonna wanna have some sort of solution, right? I'm not gonna say if Cisco has it or not. Yes, we do, but you're gonna want to have some solution that allows you to examine that endpoint, like my laptop right here, talking to anywhere in the internet, right? If it's gonna be making a connection to command and control, I want to be able to have a solution on my laptop that sees that and sees that that connection is bad and stop it. It sounds like a firewall, but this is actually something called TNS-based security, right? And there's a little bit more depth into it. So that's actually one. Second thing is, at the point where this ransomware lands on my machine, I want to be able to have a solution on my machine that can actually detect the behavior of this file, that could detect that, this file is kind of behaving very similar to NotPetya or some other type of ransomware. And once I could identify those markers based on behavior, based on hashes or whatever it is, I need to be able to isolate and stop that file from even moving laterally or executing and so on and so forth. So there's a two-pronged approach on the individual side of it. On the organization side of it, there's a lot more that we could do. right? You need to be looking at your network for behavioral patterns, right? You want to be able to analyze traffic moving from my computer to your computer, my computer to a server. We want to be able to look at that traffic and see if something anonymous is happening. We also want to look at, for example, what's going in and out of my network, using traditional firewalls. That could be something as well too. But definitely on the endpoint, a quick, easy solution to ransomware is basically make sure you have something that can look at those internet connections that your endpoint is making, and you're not behind a firewall, right? So some kind of DNS-based type security solution. And then also make sure you have something on the endpoint and stuff that could detect bad files. Now, you would have typically heard about this like anti-malware, right? I'm raising that. I'm CU, your anti-malware, and I'm going endpoint detection and response, because anti-malware goes this far and you need to go a little bit further than that. So those are my two quick answers to this, how do we protect against ransomware?
Thank you, Kevin. And I absolutely love technology. We're actually at the top of the hour, but I've got one more question for you, and then we wrap it up. Kevin, give me one thing that you would change in the region that would really help us as a region, the Caribbean region, to become much more digitally enabled and digitally powerful?
Justin, that is I really love that question, and I'll tell you why. Because it's a topic very dear to me, and the reason for that is when we look at what's happening here in the Caribbean and regionally, right? And we all know this is not news for us, right? This is not like, oh, digitization is a new word for us. No, we know this. Digital transformation has been, almost beaten to a pulp here in this region. So we are aware of what these concepts are. But what the challenge to me is, the challenge right now is a cultural challenge. And culturally, from the perspective of, from top down. So you need to have leadership investment into technology as a cultural adaptation to a way of life. And I think that's the biggest challenge where we're at right now, where we need to start seeing technology not as a bright, shiny object, because believe you me, there are some parts in the region where technology is still a bit of a challenge. And we need to start seeing technology as an enabler of life rather than a complement of life. It's different. One is actually driving you, one is just there as an alternative, right? So I think once we have that cultural shift, and I'll give you an example, right? When I remember I lived in the US for about 6 years, and I did everything online, right? Paid my bills and ordered food and all that kind of stuff, right? And I moved back to Trinidad back in 2014, I think it was. And I moved back to Trinidad, and I remember just kind of like having tension headaches, right? Because it was just like, okay, why can't I do this online? Why can I not do this online? So on and so forth. But my way of life had shifted to a more technology-driven way of life, because that was, enabling to me. You're a technology driver. I'm a technology driver. So we made that, that was appealing to me. And then I realized, like, from a cultural perspective, that's not something a lot of people are for, because they either intimidated by it, they're a little bit scared about it. So I do also think we need to have some education, right, around how technology can make your life better, and how technology can make things work for you. And last but not least, like I was saying, leadership and leadership buy-in. I do think we have a lot of really bright people here in the region, and we could actually become what I consider overall technology net producers rather than overall technology net consumers. Because I do believe we can actually start building on solutions here in the Caribbean that we can consume, that makes our life easier. But again, we need that critical mass of shift in mindset, and shift in culture, and shift in leadership to embrace and adopt technology, for us to really start to see that move forward. And one of the things that happened with COVID and the pandemic is now we're seeing technology, now it's taking off. All right.
Wow. So I want you to close off in one sentence, but I want to just summarize probably everything that we talked about today. Really, in order for us to evolve as a region, and I'll steal a framework from artificial intelligence, and really a lot of words that you use today, Kevin. We need to develop the mindset. We have to have the enterprises to drive things forward. We need the leadership, right, to make that happen. And I'm confident that we have the leadership in the region. We need the data, which is a big struggle in the region. And we certainly need this skill set. So that's the MELS framework. And from a skill set perspective, I think Kevin is Trini, testament to the fact that we do have this skill set in the region. So I want everybody to remember the MELS framework as we drive forward, and in terms of becoming more digitally enabled, in terms of becoming more secure in the Caribbean region. Kevin, give me closing sentence.
Absolutely. And whilst I'm doing that, may I encourage you to post in the chat that framework that you just saw, so all the participants can actually go check it out, maybe our website or something like that.
Certainly.
But yeah, so long story short, today we're in a new normal, right? Things are different. The way we consume goods and services are different. The way we consume and use technology is different. That's always a good thing. Technology will always enable us and drive us towards greater and better things. Whilst we have that in mind, always remember that center, which is the person, people, right? People centered, and think about what's important to you around that. And of course, let's secure those, outlying or evolving risks as they come along or as they shift in terms of our business and in terms of the way we do business as well too, or the way we consume goods or services. So, security as a conversation, it's definitely something that is shifting, it's evolving even without the pandemic. Continue to think about how you consume it, how you use it, how you supply it, and continue to think about those innovative ways that we can help you with, to help make this secure and to help you sleep better at night.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. I want to say to our audience, thank you for your time. Remember that the next webinar is next Tuesday, the 28th of July at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And during that conversation, we will focus on innovative network optimizing using customer experience. And our guest will be Christine Korozjak. I don't know if I got that correctly. Korowajak. I think it's a Polish name or something. But she is the VP of Technical Sales at Cellplan Technologies. And just a reminder, you can see our webinars, past ones. So please log on to our website, canto.org/COVID-19. Remember, you can work from anywhere, stay safe, and stay connected with Canto Conversations. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Justin. Fantastic job, my friend.
Right back at you.